1. 3 years ago I met, who is now my best friend, Kay, through working in a restaurant. We immediately found that we had similar interests. Oh, you're a girl that likes gaming, word, let's hang out. We were about 21 and 22 at the time. Fast forward to our first day hanging out outside of work. We go to a brewery downtown because we share the similar craving for this thing on the menu called crack fries. They're seasoned to absolute perfection and tossed in truffle oil, would recommend, 10 out of 10. We had some beers, talked about school, and eventually decided to check out what events were going on in the Park Circle downtown. Always sobered up. The Park Circle had different events going on throughout the week. Swing dancing on Tuesdays, jazz on Wednesdays. It was Wednesday and I wanted to check if the jazz event was in season. Ah, shit. I glanced out of the circle to what appeared to be a church event. It's not for another month. The church event was playing this chill and ambient instrumental music. The weather finally crept its way up to 70 degrees and sunny. We decided to stay, pitch up a hammock, and enjoy the artsy musical culture our city holds in the Park Circle. Kay had never hammocked before or seen the events in the circle, so I was pretty stoked to share what would be a new experience for her. We were facing each other, sharing stories from our pasts, tugging at the ropes to rock the hammock back and forth. It's a great first friend date. We're laughing, just two peas in a pod, looking up at the finally blue sky of springtime, watching the sunlight filter through the treetops overhead, until the greasy, cracked-out face of a man hovers into our vision.
Looks like fun, mind if I join ya?
He uninvitedly plops his backpack against a tree, holding our hammock strap. We exchange an unsettled glance and immediately sat upright to face the man. It's broad daylight, and homeless people sometimes meander towards the circle and sat under the shady trees to just hang out. Some asked for money, but most kept to themselves. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was kinda creeped out by the guy, but didn't think much of it because I'm used to interactions with homeless people. My mother was homeless, so I guess you could say I have a soft spot for having a conversation about their life. Not giving them money, maybe offering a cigarette, and leaving it at that. Kay hasn't had that experience, so she keeps glancing back at me for some support of what the hell do we do. The guy decides that he's welcome, cracks open a 40 in a crinkled paper bag, and takes a few swigs. He extends his can to offer us some. We declined and ask him what he's doing.
Just seeing what's going on down here. Noticed a large group down there.
He points a dirty stub of a fingernail out to the circle.
Saw you two set up and thought this swingy thingy looked cool.
I already considered saying, oh, we were just leaving. But he watched us set up. Getting up and packing up now after being there only 10 to 20 minutes would only indicate fear. Kay raises an eyebrow at me. I'm fairly new to the whole hammocking thing, so I'm trying to quickly devise how to casually grab my hammock, what excuse sounds most believable to make an exit, and nope right out of there. He gives the typical creeper interview questions. Where are you from? What are you doing? We give him short replies, hoping that he'll take a hint and go bother someone else. He only gets closer.
What's this?
He starts rocking our hammock. Kay's eyes cut into mine with a panic. A hammock.
Where'd you buy 'em? Thinking about getting one of my own.
Maybe this guy genuinely wanted to buy a hammock and is socially inept, not realizing rocking two girls in a hammock is creepy as fuck. I look down to the circle. Everyone's just doing their church thing. I look towards the walking paths that spiral out from the circle. I give passers-by a wide-eyed look of, please help us. They exchange this same look of, well, that's creepy, sucks to be you girls, and continue walking. I look to the other side of the road and see a strange construction van pull up, the plate obscured. There was no business information on the side, but then again, my uncle drives a similar van for work. I expect to see a construction worker come out, but it's a man dressed in business casual talking on a cell phone. We'll call him BC for a business casual guy. The homeless man nods his head at BC, who starts slowly and casually making his way towards us, while maintaining his conversation. BC is speaking a different language. I assume it's Hindi because I had a friend, Andrea, who grew up half Indian with her native-speaking grandma and her father. By her family's interactions, I could usually tell when something serious was going down, family, money issues, etc. Sometimes I'd pick up small words in their conversations and try to understand what they meant. I was studying French in college at the time, and learned that once you study a language, it can become pretty universal. You don't understand just that language, you pick up on similar sounding vowels and words which hold a pretty similar meaning. From that, you can kind of decipher a translation. From BC's body language and words, how he kept looking towards us with predatory eyes, I felt completely hollowed out. And then the feeling of a lead weight sank in my chest when I hear him say, "Dula dak." In a Hindi to French to English conversation that my brain puzzled together, "du" is similar to "de", is similar to "tu". Ladakh, the rest of the word cut out, was pronounced in a way that reminded me of what Andrea's grandmother called us when we were in middle school, before she translated her broken English and said girls. BC discreetly motioned towards us. I take out my cell phone and bring up an old text, pretending I just got it. "Hey Kay, looks like Chris and Jordan are here. They're looking for us right now." I throw my body off the hammock, unclip it from the loop, and swiftly pull the hammock straps from the tree. Kay never took a hammock nap before, but learned very quickly. We threw the jumbled heap of hammock and its straps in my backpack, and the homeless man calls after,
"Where are you going?"
We swiveled into a crowd of people, and when I turn, I see the homeless man and BC speaking, motioning angrily back towards us. We scramble through the crowds of people, and down a few side streets until we're out of sight. Later, we tell my aunt and uncle when we get to my house. By the way, this is my friend Kay, and here's what happened. My aunt's eyes are cold, and she tells us that sex trafficking and abductions of young women have been on the rise in our city, pulling women into vans from the side of the road, or using markers of objects or people to indicate targets. We were a very visible target, sitting nearby a street in a highlighter yellow hammock. Creepy business casual dude driving a work van, and homeless guy who probably scored a natural ice for keeping us distracted. Let's not meet. And let's hope you don't meet any other dude at a keen. 2 girls, or any girls ever. 2. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. And you could see and hear them coming from very far away, due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads, and take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow paved path that was the only piece of land separating 2 sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill, overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants in darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers right up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-sized motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other, and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through, and honestly we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there, and we can see you, come on out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. We had erased any hope that we had that they were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths. One of them already coming full circle and passing the point he started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their furthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for them to drive past us, while basically being only covered in leaves and plants, may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the two main roads, far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our long board excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him, and was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the two streets we were near the corner of and explained that we needed picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything I had just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I have been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose. 3. Context. My brother ran away from home years ago because of our circumstances, but I remained close with him. At the time of this story, I am 22, now 27, female, 5'1", petite, and lived with my ultra-controlling stepfather who didn't allow me to do anything or go anywhere without permission. This included what jobs I could have, what I could spend money on, what friends I could have, and even whether I could leave the house for any reason. I had no license or permit, and was not allowed to drive since he refused to teach me. I was always completely reliant on him for anything and everything. He always told me never to trust anyone but him, but I was a nice person at heart and believed everyone had the best intentions. I had also never dated and had little experience with encounters with men due to my stepfather. I was very naive about the world, and trying to work on being more outgoing, since I spent most of my life being shy and almost mute. The story of the creepy chef. I had convinced my stepfather to let me see my brother's graduation from the military basic training in the Air Force after a lot of angsty arguing. He didn't think my brother was worth the money, but I was persistent, and he relented. However, he told me he'd only let me go by bus because it was cheaper than flying. I lived in upstate Burke, New York, and the graduation was in San Antonio, Texas. It was a 3-day trip by bus one way, and I had never gone anywhere alone. Stubborn to prove that he couldn't deter me, I took the deal to go. I packed a single suitcase and took my laptop as a carry-on. He watched and waited with me at the first stop, telling me I would regret it, but he wouldn't come get me if I called. I told him I'd have fun and prove I could do things on my own. The first bus ride was pretty uneventful. After around 3 hours, I reached the transfer station and waited for the second bus to arrive. After around 30 minutes, a pretty normal-looking white guy with light brown hair steps off a bus, and he's carrying a black duffel bag. He looked at me and the sign overhead stating when the bus for that route would arrive, and then happily strode over and sat himself beside me. He was clean-shaven and had pretty green eyes. I like to compliment people and make their day, so I turn to him and say, "I just wanted to say that you have really pretty eyes." He looked at me with a big smile and says, "Thank you, I was just thinking you're very pretty." Feeling warm and fuzzy about the compliment, I thank him and return to looking around and people watching while we wait for the bus. I was only allowed to have an old flip phone, so I had nothing to do. As I sit there, the guy turns to me and starts making idle conversation about his day, where he's heading, and asking me where I was heading. He seems friendly and nice, so I tell him about my brother and how proud I am of him, and how I was going to see his graduation. He seemed really interested about it, and as we talked, the bus arrived. We both get on and he asks if he can sit with me, and I tell him of course he can. The bus is mostly empty, maybe about 8 or 10 people there, including us, and we sat maybe 5 or 6 rows away from any occupied seats. As we sat down, he continued our conversation. "Well, Texas is far away," he says. "Why not just take a plane?" My stepfather won't let me, I tell him. So he begins asking for details, asking how old I was, how could I not be allowed, etc. So I tell him what life is like with my stepdad, and he broods over it a moment, and then says, "You can come live with me." I look at him and say, "What?" At this point the alarm bells start ringing. The guy goes on to tell me that he's a well-known chef and travels from place to place, showing off his skill at 5-star venues. He brings his black duffel bag onto his lap and says he keeps his knives and other cooking utensils in the bag so they don't get damaged in transit. And they're very expensive, so he doesn't trust anyone else to handle them. He then takes out his phone from his olive green hoodie and begins showing me pictures of his work, plates of highly decorative food. He then shows me his hands, which are covered in scars, old and new cuts and sores. He says he's very serious about his work. By this point I get a little creeped out. I begin thinking, if he's as good and reputable as he says he is, why are his hands in such bad shape? Shouldn't injuries like that be more common in a novice? He states I can live with him and travel the world and see great things with him. He goes on and on for literally hours as the ride drags on. It was a 4-hour drive, and the more he spoke, the more uneasy I felt. I kept telling him I wasn't sure about it, afraid to say no outright. He kept saying he would take care of me. I'd have nothing to worry about. He'd teach me how to live in the world. He'd teach me his craft, so I could work hard too and we'd be famous together. But he also quickly added I wouldn't have to. He said he wouldn't make me work if I didn't want to, but he wouldn't mind me staying with him regardless. I was really creeped out and just wanting to be away from him now. But I didn't know what to do or say to be polite about it. And I was in the window seat. This guy was around 6 feet tall and probably weighed around 2 times my weight. I began going over escape routes in my mind, trying to think of ways to flee from someone who could possibly overpower me with one arm behind his back, if he wanted to. The more wishy-washy responses I gave, the more adamantly he tried to sell his offer, becoming noticeably more irritated that I wasn't accepting his generous proposal. Eventually he stopped talking, and we spent the last 30 minutes in silence. He looked really upset, and I felt bad because I felt like it was my fault for not going along with it despite his passion. And I don't like making people sad. When we reached the next transfer station, he stood up and gestured for me to go first. "Ladies first," he said in a grumble. I jumped out of that seat and moved faster than I ever had in my entire life, neglecting to even respond or say goodbye. I found where my bus would come and sat there right on the front bench in front of a ton of bustling people getting off of a bus from the shuttle adjacent to mine. As I looked around, I saw a creepy chef looking around over the tops of the crowd, searching for what I hoped was not my bus. He then landed his gaze on me and began walking purposefully towards me, with an incredibly chilling smirk on his face. I looked around me, hoping to make eye contact with someone else to silently plead for help. And when I looked back in front of me, creepy chef had stopped in front of me. In the most forced version of a friendly tone he could muster, he said, "It was such a pleasure to meet you." And then he quickly swooped down, grabbing me in a one-armed hug and planted a kiss on my cheek. I sat in stunned silence as he turned and said, "I really hope I see you again, but my bus is a different one." And left me there stunned while some onlookers watched in slight confusion at the exchange. For the entirety of my next bus ride, I could still feel where he kissed me, and felt really unnerved. I'd never been so close to a male stranger in my entire life, let alone held and kissed against my will. So, creepy chef guy, let's not ever meet again. The story of the angry narcissist. The rest of the day and the next day of bus riding were completely uneventful. I spent those rides making sure I sat away from everyone if I could, napping a few hours here and there. It was hard to get any meaningful sleep since most of the layovers were only about an hour or two long, but I was too afraid of missing the bus if I slept at the station since I had no alarms. It was early morning, around 1 a.m., and while I was waiting at the nearly empty transfer station for the bus that would arrive at 3 a.m. and take me on the final 14-hour leg to San Antonio. As I sat waiting, feeling super tired, a skinny, short guy that looked Hispanic with thick, curly black hair sat across from me. He had his hands in the pockets of his maroon hoodie and looked at me. I looked back and gave him a polite nod but no words. Still a little on guard because of creepy chef guy. He smiled slightly and asked, "3 a.m. bus?" I nodded. He nodded and looked around us and then asked, "Been here long?" I replied, "About 45 minutes. After about 15 minutes of silence and us awkwardly sitting trying not to look at each other, he began spontaneously introducing himself. He told me that he was a recently graduated college student who had decided to travel the world and meet new people. He went on really long, detailed stories about the places he'd been, and the different foods he had tried, and the strange people he had met. He was extremely charismatic, and as a very sheltered person who had little worldly experience, I found him fascinating. I found some solace in the fact that this guy had met some weird people on his travels, so I concluded he couldn't be too bad. He knew what it was like to be creeped out by people after all. I engaged him in chatter, introducing myself and telling him my story. He seemed really intrigued by it, saying that he almost didn't believe me, but commending my bravery for choosing to travel unfamiliar places, commenting that I jumped in head first before I had even tested the waters. I said I could be a little headstrong if I wanted to. We took the 2 hours chatting about everything from food to weather to family and hopes for the future. All in all, he seemed really cool. The bus finally arrives and we get on. I take an aisle seat this time, and he asks if he can sit in the aisle next to me, so I agree. We talk a little more and nap during portions of the 6-hour drive. All is well. We get off at the transfer station, and it turns out that he's getting on the same bus I need to. It's only a 15-minute wait for the next bus, so we spend it chatting and he asks for my number, saying he didn't want to forget since our next bus was different. I explain that I only have a flip phone, so I can't really text, but he says that's fine. We exchange numbers and all is cool. We get on the bus and it is packed. There is only one set of seats left, and we hurriedly sardine ourselves into the seat, me at the window, him in the middle, and an older woman in the aisle. The rest have to stand. He jokes about how uncomfortable bus travel is, and I agree. As the trip gets underway, he looks at me and suddenly asks with a wide-eyed look, "Has anyone ever told you how gorgeous you are?" I tilt my head a little and respond, "Sometimes, but the attention is usually not good." I was feeling a little on guard because of the way he was looking at me. So he asks me what I mean, and I tell him different stories of when I had been sexually harassed while at high school and college. He thinks about it and then firmly attempts to reassure me that he's not like that. He then goes on a tirade about how amazing he is and how any woman would be lucky to have him. that he would treat them like gold. I start getting creeped out, and I realize I won't be able to get away from him for the duration of the ride. The bus was too packed, so even if I was in the aisle, I was trapped. He then asked me, "Doesn't that sound awesome? Wouldn't you like something like that?" Referencing all of the doting things he would do if a girl would only give him the chance. For the sake of not making him angry, I gave wishy-washy responses. No firm yes or no, just things like, "I don't know, I've never thought about that," or "Maybe, but I don't know that I'd want to be in a relationship right now." So he spent the next 3 hours telling me how amazing he was, citing all of the examples he had, and all of the women who had lost their amazing chance with him. He became increasingly agitated that I didn't seem impressed by him, and eventually he crossed his arms, pulled his hood up, and sank down into his chair for the final 45 minutes of the ride, and remained silent. The old woman next to him had long since put on a pair of earmuffs and a blindfold and gone to sleep with her neck pillow. I wish I could say it ended there, but it didn't. After we disembarked, we went our separate ways, and I enjoyed sitting alone while waiting for the final bus to take me to San Antonio. Unfortunately, I forgot about giving that guy my cell number. After about 20 minutes, he started blowing up my phone with angry texts. He stated how stupid and inferior I was to him, and how he was too good for me anyway, and that I would never understand what an amazing man he was, and how he was glad I didn't try to give him a chance because I was so beneath him, and he'd feel awful having someone so second-rate on his arm. Then he went on an entire spiel about how women are so worthless. I was entirely confused. At no point did he explicitly ask me to date him, and I didn't understand why he was reacting this way. I tried questioning him, asking what he was talking about, and why he was so mad at me, but he just kept saying I was too stupid to understand, he was too complicated and sophisticated for a Neanderthal like me to even begin to comprehend his greatness. After being thoroughly insulted and unable to calm him, I called him a jerk and stopped responding. He sent 5 more paragraphs and 5 texts to explain his amazingness and reasons why I was the jerk and not him. I never replied, and he kept texting "respond bitch" about 5 or 6 times before finally leaving one last text, calling me a snooty, stupid, judgmental whore who didn't even know a good man when she saw one. In his entire tirades, I'd literally never been so insulted in my life. I didn't know how to block people on my phone, so I could only wait for him to get bored of me and not responding. I felt so upset by the time I got to my last stop. For the next few days, he'd send a couple of angry, insulting texts that I didn't respond to, and eventually stopped. So, angry narcissist, let's not meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 396. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, I'm going to keep this outro brief, just because I've got a lot to do. But I just wanted to thank, I haven't said it for a while, but I just want to thank everybody new who has subscribed recently. But we enjoyed a few months there. It's gone down a bit now, but we enjoyed a few months with a good bit of subscriber growth, so that was lovely to see. And of course, I'd like to thank everyone who has stuck with me on the ever since I started this. In these, full time about 3 years, but it was longer than that. Was it 2015 I started? Yeah, I think it was. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.